Thank you. What an honor to be here. Thank you, Minister Marvin. Thank you to all of you. It's been probably 20 years since I spoke here. And how well I remember Cecil. For any of you who might not know the history and the magnificent legacy of this church, I always say Glide was woke before woke existed. This has always been a kind of incubator for high spiritual thoughts and vibrations and activism. And I can't imagine a more important moment in our history than now for us to summon within ourselves all the lessons that we have learned, both in terms of personal transformation and societal transformation up until this point. Minister Marvin was talking about the fact that this month you are honoring the great sacred stories, you're honoring your ancestors, you're honoring those things which we remember from the past in order to live up to them and in order to carry great things forward. And I think when it comes to sacred stories, we have a lot of examples, not only in our great biblical and other scriptural traditions, but also in our politics. I want to start this morning by just mentioning Minister Marvin was talking about love and how love is everything and love is so important and we celebrate love. But at the same time, in all the great religious traditions, even though there is the dedication to love, to mercy, to justice, there is also within all the great religious traditions a deep acknowledgement, understanding, analysis, and guidance regarding that which is not love. Before the Israelites entered the Promised Land, first they were enslaved by the Pharaoh. Before Jesus resurrected, first he was crucified. So if you go right to the Promised Land and ignore the slavery that preceded it, if you go right to the resurrection and ignore the crucifixion, you are not in transcendence, you are in denial. And at this moment in our history, for us to live up to the challenges which are so illumined by the lessons in all these great scriptural traditions, we understand both forces, what they're about, and how our ancestors have lived up to them in the past. When Moses led the Israelites to the Promised Land, there was no map. He just knew, and he was told by God to have faith. And not everybody loved him for that, but he knew that there was another possibility. And that is always what the great religious leaders and also what the great political leaders have represented. Faith in another possibility. That which is yet unseen, but which we hold in our hearts to be possible. So this morning I'd like to talk to you about a great sacred story which we share as Americans. And for that, let's go back to 1776. In 1776, a document was signed, our Declaration of Independence, and that Declaration of Independence is America's mission statement. It's our North Star. It reminds us who we are and what we are here to do. And in our personal lives as well as our national life, if you lose sight of what this is all about, what your deepest identity is, what your purpose is, then you lose your power. This is why Moses, he kept his rod up high. The Israelites were victorious. Sometimes the burden was too great for him, and others had to support him in lifting it back up so that there would be victory for his people. And that is where we are now. We have forgotten in too many cases what the aspect of identity is, what the aspect of purpose is, and so we have swerved, and we too are in a period of decline on many, many levels. In 1776, the 56 very, very brave men signed the document of the Declaration of Independence. And I point out that they were very brave because if the British had won the war, they would have all been executed as traitors against the King of England. And with that document, the world changed because the words in the Declaration of Independence were the repudiation of centuries of tyranny, of centuries of classism, of centuries of social and political orders in which only a few people were deemed entitled to power. And with those words, they said that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. All men are created equal. That all men are given by God inalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Now, if you put those in today's words, that means everybody has the right to self-actualization. Everybody should have the right to spread their wings and soar, to manifest their dreams, to become everything that they want to be, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. And then it goes on, it gets very radical. It's already radical in the things that I've already said, but it gets more so. It says the government is instituted to secure those rights, not limit those rights. Not chip away at those rights, not to suppress those rights, but to secure those rights. And then it gets so radical that it says if government's not doing its job, it's the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Now, that's where the story began in a great burst of light. You know, the spiritual journey is the path of the heart, and there's such heart and soulfulness in those principles. So they were a great burst of light. Well, that's where it all started, but it's also where it also got very gnarly, isn't it? Because out of the 56 signers of that declaration, 41 of them were slave owners. Now, that is America's story. That is built into America's DNA. We are both and. We have always been both and. You don't understand the story if you don't get that we're both and. That's the context for American history. And every generation, from the very beginning, all the way onto ours, lives out that struggle, that tension between two forces. One force is people whose hearts get it, ablaze with, oh my God, what a sacred responsibility we hold in our hands. What a sacred possibility we hold in our hands. That we are a nation founded on the idea that anybody should have a chance to soar. And we don't just have rights from that, we have the responsibility to hold that, to care for it, to expand that, and to protect that from any forces or people who would seek to tear it down. But there have also been those in every generation who, from the very beginning, for their own financial and/or ideological purposes, put their property rights over human rights, put their ability to get what they wanted financially or ideologically before any democratic or humanitarian principles, and have proven throughout our history that they would in fact do, well, whatever it took to make sure that those principles were not manifest. That's the story, that's the tension, and every generation has played out its iteration of that struggle, some more dramatically than others. But if you look at our story through time, we've done pretty well, because slavery, which is certainly an institutional reflection of that undemocratic, anti-democratic principle, where there were generations that stood up to that, repudiated that. The Civil War, abolition. Then there was another institutional suppression of women. And there was a generation, the women's suffragette movement, they rose up, they passed the 19th Amendment. Then there was another institutional reality, the Gilded Age, the fortified power of the Gilded Age, money in the hands of just a few. A generation rose up with the establishment of the organized labor movement. And then there was another institutionalized reflection of such suppression and anti-democracy, which was segregation and institutionalized oppression of black people in the American South. And a generation rose up and repudiated that with the Civil Rights Movement, and with the Voting Rights Act, and with the Civil Rights Act. You might have heard I'm running for president because it's our turn now. But in our time, it's not a specific institutional reality. It's an economic paradigm that represents the spirit of fear, the spirit of anti-democracy, the spirit of suppression. And Abraham Lincoln said that the Declaration of Independence is an eternal rebuke to all forces of tyranny and oppression. Today's tyranny in this country is economic tyranny. And the economic paradigm which tyrannizes this country, which now governs this country, and whose yoke must be thrown off by the people of this country, is a matrix. It is a matrix of corporate overlords. It is insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies and big food companies and big chemical companies and big agricultural companies and big banks and big gun manufacturers and big oil and defense contractors. And their tentacles, the tentacles of this malevolent strain of capitalism, often called vulture capitalism, now has its tentacles into every corner of our society. 1 in 4 Americans who live with medical debt, 68,000 Americans who die every year because we don't have health care, 85 million Americans who are underinsured or uninsured, 1.3 million Americans who ration their insulin, all of the people who are lined up for food outside this building, the 1/3 of America's workforce who live on less than $15 an hour and half of whom cannot find a place to live, half of our seniors living on $25,000 and less a year, and all because those forces of such institutionalized corporate power have such undue influence on our government that they have turned our government into a system of legalized bribery. So that instead of advocating for us and securing our rights, they have become the enablers, the institutionalized enabler of these forces, who now exercise such economic tyranny over the vast number of Americans as to have actually already undermined our democracy and destroyed our middle class. We are not a thriving democracy at this point, we are a thriving oligarchy. And at this point, that is our current story. That situation is now baked into the cake. That situation is now the status quo. What I have come to recognize, and what I think a lot of Americans have come to recognize on both the right and the left, that status quo will not disrupt itself. It's time for the people to step in. Now, of course, that system would say that you can't have anyone unqualified in there, because their idea of qualified is someone who is experienced enough to maintain and perpetuate the system as it is. I think what we need at this point is someone whose qualification is she knows something about how to disrupt that system, not to maintain that system. We need a complete economic U-turn in this country, much as when Franklin Roosevelt said, well, it was his wife who first told him, but he agreed. He said that alleviation of stress is not enough. We need fundamental economic reform. You know, when COVID was over and our president declared that the emergency was over now, you can go back to your life. For millions of Americans, life was already an emergency. It wasn't a screaming emergency, it was a silent emergency. Poverty is an emergency. Hunger is an emergency. Lack of health care is an emergency. Living in neighborhoods where you don't know if your child is going to be safe tonight simply because of this fact of a stray bullet that might affect that child, even kill that child. And when our children are going to school in places where they don't even have the adequate resources to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 10, then the chances of high school graduations drastically decreased and the chances of incarceration drastically increased. Carcinogens in our food, PFAS in our water, toxins in our air. At what point are we going to say, no, we're not going to do that anymore? You know, when it comes to our personal lives, we don't take stuff like that. In our personal lives, we have boundaries. In our personal lives, we're pretty sophisticated, the average American, about the games that people play and about our ability to take care of ourselves and not allow those games to be played. You could say about any person in this room, you could say, okay, you over there and you over there, go have lunch today. You've never even met. And the American character is such that there's a very good chance that within 30 minutes, you're getting real in a way that you would not in every other culture. Who are your kids? Who are your parents? Have you been married? Have you gone to school? Do you have any? What are your issues? What do you talk about in therapy? I mean, we get down and we get real. But when it comes to our political conversations, we have been trained to think like sixth graders. We have been trained to keep it shallow. We have been trained to limit our political imaginations. We have been trained to expect too little. We have been trained to farm out our critical thinking. We have been trained to just parrot the lines, the stale platitudes handed down to us by whatever political party or whatever political ideology we associate with. You know, this is not the time for that. This is time for mature individuals who don't relate just to your silo, don't relate just to your color or just to your sex or your sexuality or your religion or your political party. Because after all of those separate identities, there's a hyphen. And on the other side of that hyphen, there's another word, and it's called American. You know, the poet Rumi, out beyond all ideas of good and bad, right or wrong, there is a field, and I'll meet you there. And that field is the field of love. But that field of love isn't necessarily an easy love. It's not a comfortable love. It's not a love that is in denial about the things that would obstruct love. You know, Martin Luther King said that in order to establish the beloved community, he said, we need quantitative changes in our circumstances, but we need qualitative shifts in our souls. I think at this moment in our history, we have to not only think about what to do, we have to think about who do we need to be in order to even discern what to do, much less in order to be able to do it. So I'd like to talk for a moment about some of the qualities of character that I think are necessary in order for us to both endure the times in which we live and also to transform them. First of all, the era of data collection is over. Everything I have said here today, you already knew. We don't need any more research about the challenges. We get it. At this point, the question isn't, well, how bad is it or how challenging is it? The issue now, who do I need to be? And then what do we need to do? The being state of being precedes powerful doing. And I think more than anything else, you know what we need in our generation? We need some bravery. We need some courage. If I hear one more person talking about how traumatized everyone is, you think the people who walked across the bridge at Selma weren't traumatized? They didn't know if they were going to pull out the dogs, if they were going to pull out the hoses, or even pull out the bullets, but they walked. You think the women suffragists who, because they stood for simply the women's right to vote, were thrown into prison, and the conditions in the prison were so bad that they went on a hunger strike. The reaction of the prison officials was to send men into their cells and force these metal contraptions onto their necks and force feed them. Don't you think they experienced some anxiety? Toughen up, buttercups. We have a revolution to wage in this country. But the second revolution in America is a revolution of consciousness, and it is a revolution to be waged at the ballot box. But even in order for us to do that, we have to summon something from very deep inside of us. We have to summon up the power to realize that sometimes love says no. We all talk about love, love, love. Love sometimes says no, as in, no, there should not be one hungry child in the United States of America. No, it is unacceptable for us to have the highest poverty rate. It is that line outside this building, it is unacceptable, and no amount of private charity can compensate for a basic lack of social justice. You know, nowhere in the Constitution does it say, well, we don't have to worry about those people, they probably don't vote anyway. But give all these performative applauses to churches which are going to help. That's all that's about. Oh, throw it over to the churches, throw it over to the nonprofits. Charity will help those people. That is very different than the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for every person. That is very different than the government's responsibility to secure those rights. That is very different than the people intervening if the government is not doing its job. Now, some people would say, oh, she's kind of radical. Well, the Declaration of Independence is radical. That is the point. And also, every issue that would represent an economic U-turn, that would represent the repudiation of the economic tyranny that is represented by the undue power of corporate forces in this country, are considered moderate positions in every other advanced democracy. In every other advanced democracy, universal health care, they all have a moderate position. Tuition-free college and tech school, they all have them. It's considered a moderate position, and we had them here until the 1970s. You had it in California, the crown jewel of the University of California system. University of Texas had it, and University of Florida had it. Tuition-free college and tech school, cancellation of those college loan debts, subsidized childcare, paid family leave, guaranteed living wage, guaranteed sick pay, guaranteed access to housing. That should be center. It is centered in every other advanced democracy. And we're told by the very system that perpetuates all that injustice, oh, it's just too complicated. It's not complicated, ladies and gentlemen and everyone else. It's corrupt. And it is corrupt in a way that is not going to correct itself. And it's time for us to realize this. Oh, they'll tweak it a little bit here and they'll tweak it a little bit there, you know? They'll go a little slower, but we just have to make incremental change. Meanwhile, people's lives are falling apart. People's lives literally are falling apart. People are dying deaths of despair, illnesses of despair. And then the same system which constantly passes laws that make it easier for those who already have capital to accumulate more capital, and even harder for those who don't have capital to even get by. They have the audacity to say, I just don't know where that mental health crisis comes from. Where does the mental health crisis come from? You have 70% of Americans who report living with chronic economic anxiety. The majority of Americans who cannot afford to absorb a $1,000 unexpected expenditure. Debt. 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt, people in their 20s living with tens of thousands of dollars of college loan debt, particularly young people of color who were told that's going to close the wage gap for you. That'll do it. So you just got to get an education. So I have met so many young people. They got the education, and now they got the degree and doing what they'd really love to do. But then when they think of getting a beginning position in the field of what they'd love to do, they can't imagine ever being able to pay off those college loan debts. So then they end up going to work somewhere where they could conceive of paying off those college loan debts and where they will get the benefits of health care that otherwise they wouldn't get. And people are depressed and people are unhappy and people are wondering, why did I even go to college? Making some other people think, well, I don't see any point in going to college, which will only dumb us down further. At what point in our personal lives we wouldn't take this? In our personal lives, we'd say, I have a boundary. I have some self-care going on here. In our personal lives, we would say, no. This is wrong. This is wrong. I should have a shot at this too. That's what we would say in our personal lives, and it's time for us to say that in our collective lives. We are headed, my fellow Americans, we're headed for the iceberg. That iceberg could be a climate catastrophe. It could be an AI catastrophe. It could be a nuclear catastrophe. And you have one major political party headed right there, and you have another major political party, which, under the leadership of its established corporatist wing, is moving there more slowly and would hit it at a different angle. One represents a nosedive, and the other represents a managed decline. We've got to turn this ship around, and that's what fundamental economic reform would do. This country is wounded, and we need to initiate a season of repair. And that's what Minister Marvin was talking about. You simply know where you need to go. We need to imagine a world at peace and reverse engineer from there. We need to imagine a country with democracy restored, a world in which the earth itself is restored, a country in which people's lives are restored. And that is why we should have an economic bill of rights with all the things I mentioned, such as universal health care and a guaranteed living wage and tuition-free college and tech school. That is why we should have a Department of Peace. Right now, we spend billions and billions and billions on ways to effectuate war and a tiny fraction of that on ways to wage peace. We need a Department of Children and Youth because America's children are neglected collectively. The average American is not allowing themselves to face. I have had principals in elementary schools telling me they have students on suicide watch. Public schools throughout this country that have trauma rooms. We have children who are traumatized by preschool. We have a situation where everybody's talking about trauma-informed education. Great, I'm all for it. But we also have to ask ourselves, why is childhood a trauma for so many millions of American children? We have to treat not just the symptoms, we have to treat the root causes. And we also need, in our time, to end the war on drugs. The war on drugs was started in 1971. It was started by Richard Nixon, who we now know, absolutely knew that drugs were not public enemy number one. And he did it specifically as an attack on black neighborhoods, according to John Ehrlichman, his former aide, who then served time for Watergate. Since 1971, we've spent over $1 trillion on the war on drugs. It has not healed the situation, it has exacerbated it. And it has, among other things, fed the prison industrial complex. 46% of all federal offenders in prison today are nonviolent drug offenders. For that $100 billion a year that we spend on the war on drugs, and by the way, when I was in college, there were 300,000 people who were incarcerated in the United States. Today, there are 2.3 million. So for a fraction of that $100 billion that we spend every year, we could have a world-class network of recovery options. Most addicts do not wish to be addicts. Don't treat drug addiction as a criminal issue anymore. Let us treat it as a health issue. Let's do what they do in countries like Portugal. America should stop being so regressive. We used to, when I was growing up, when I was in my 30s, when my career began, yeah, there was AA. There were a lot of people that we knew in recovery, and it was a subculture in America. It was a good thing. Today, addiction, opioid deaths, deaths of despair, this is an ubiquitous problem in this country. And I don't care whether it's deaths by despair, whether it is any other problem that we have mentioned. If you look at an underlying cause, you cannot overstate the role of the systemic economic injustice and what it is doing to the people of the United States. So we don't need a president who's playing footsies under the table with those corporate forces who will say he's a climate president on one hand and then because of some healthy investments in green energy, but then on the other hand give more oil drilling permits than Trump did. No, we need somebody who will declare a climate emergency. We will go in there, somebody who just wants to go in for one term because basically she has other things she wants to do with her life beyond that. And for those 4 years, go in there not bought and sold by those corporate forces. And basically, there's nothing they could do for me, you know? It's like, what, they're going to take away my seat on the Appropriations Committee? Or they are going to primary me? I want to tell you something. There are a lot of people in positions of power in this country who believe everything I just said. Where are they? There are governors who know everything I just said. There are senators who know everything I just said. There are Congress people who know everything I just said. There are all people. They know. They're not stupid. But they're not here. Why? Because they're towing the line. They're waiting their turn. They're going along. They're acquiescing. They are surrendering. And this is what I really love. They might come into the race in the next few weeks. They didn't have enough courage to show up, to stand up to the DNC, but then they're going to get in the race and say, but they'll have the courage to stand up to the insurance companies. Yeah, right. Or they're going to stand up to the pharmaceutical companies. Or they're going to stand up to big oil, but they wouldn't stand up to the DNC. And we're going to buy this? It breaks my heart to see the rambunctiousness that should be the quality of every healthy American only being exhibited by people in right-wing extremist groups. Where are the rest of us? We've allowed ourselves to be numbed. We've allowed ourselves to go, well, you know, it's just going to take some time, even though at this point we might not even have any more time. Now, some people say to me, Marianne, why are you doing this? Don't you realize the fascists are at the door? So I just want you to know, I'm doing this because the fascists are at the door. I agree with Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt said the one way we would know that we would not have a fascist takeover in this country is if democracy delivered on its promises. Today, the problem is that democracy is not delivering on its promises. If it was, we'd have universal health care, we'd have tuition-free tech school. People's lives would not be burdened by just the struggle of what it takes to survive 2 and 3 jobs that they don't even like one of them. And so that is what is going to keep the fascists away from the White House. Yes, absolutely, they are there. But this is the thing. For those of you who are left-leaning or Democrats, or even if you're Republicans, if you do not wish to see Donald Trump president again, I tell you this, the danger, the electoral danger to the Democrats in 2024 is not Donald Trump. Stop talking about Donald Trump. People who love Donald Trump are just going to love Donald Trump, okay? No point in reminding them about one more indictment. They're going to vote for him, even if he's in prison. The danger is not Donald Trump. The danger electorally is how many people at this point would simply stay home. That is the danger in 2024. The danger in 2024 is how many people are not inspired and do not feel that anybody's offering them that much more. To say to the American people that our economy is good? Really? You know, I'm a philosopher. Be careful with that word good around me. Good for who? 20% of Americans the economy is good for. And these 20 are living on an island surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair. So it's time for the American people to wake up. It's time for the American people to rise up. It's time for the American people to recognize the sacred story of the United States, to recognize that we have a responsibility here, to recognize that other generations have risen up and said, no, we're going in another direction, and have pushed back, have repudiated economic and any other kind of tyranny, have repudiated economic or any other kind of oppression, have not allowed ourselves to be too tired, have simply not allowed ourselves to be so self-referenced that all we could think about is ourselves or our people. It's not just about your people, it's about all of the people of the world. It's about the human race. It's about the big story. It's about the big ideas. And I just want to finish with one thing. I was reading about a German poet named Heinrich Heine, and the story was about the great cathedrals of Europe. And the great cathedrals of Europe took years, centuries to build. The cathedral at Cologne took 683 years to build. And so what that meant is that the people who were spending their entire lives working on these cathedrals also knew that they would never live to see its completion. That's when you're serving something so much bigger than yourself. Now, Heinrich Heine was talking in the 1800s, and someone asked him, what is that? Why is it that people could build these great cathedrals at that time? He said, well, the difference between those people, he said, and the men of the modern age, and of course, when he was talking about the modern age, he was talking about the 1800s, but it's certainly applicable today. He said, men in those days had conviction. Men today only have opinions. I'm sorry, you cannot wage a revolution over white wine and brie, and you cannot wage a revolution from your Twitter account. It's now time for us to wage a revolution at the ballot box and to have everything that it takes to make sure that that happens. Conviction is a force multiplier, and today the greatest conviction we see is displayed by those who hate. We have to put as much conviction behind justice, as much conviction behind mercy, and as much conviction behind love as is now demonstrated by those who hate. And when we do, we will do what our ancestors did. We will repudiate what needs to be repudiated. We will course correct this nation, it having swerved in ways that it has swerved. And we will, as Moses did, lead all of our people, the American people, and in many ways, people around the world who are affected by American policy, to some place we haven't quite gotten to yet, but which at our best we have led to, we have striven for, we have moved towards, and we have even had glimpses. And we all know that there is a kernel of truth in that Declaration of Independence. There is a kernel of truth in the idea of a country in which all people should have the possibility of thriving, of manifesting, of self-actualization. That's the promised land. The promised land is when we all can look at one another with love, mercy, generosity, spirit, and know that this is the purpose of our lives, not just to get what I want, but what all of us can co-create together. And then at the end of our lives, we will be able to look in the mirror and go, in the final analysis, we did it. Thank you very much. Thank you.